The German Flak 88 anti-aircraft gun eventually became a serious threat to Allied armour. On May 21, 1940, British tankers received orders meant to change the course of the fighting. 86 tanks lined up in two columns, 3 miles apart, supported on the flank by 60 French vehicles. The goal was to strike a vulnerable section of the German offensive to stop the troop advance. Allied command was confident, as intelligence reported that German 37mm anti-tank guns couldn't penetrate the armour of the British Matilda tanks. At first, events unfolded exactly according to this scenario. Allied armour attacked the positions of the Wehrmacht's 7th Panzer Division under the command of General Erwin Rommel. German gunners opened fire, but the shells just bounced off the armour of the British machines. Wehrmacht infantry found themselves in a situation where their main anti-tank weaponry proved ineffective. A retreat began on the German positions. Soldiers abandoned their guns, some surrendered, and British tanks pushed through the trenches and destroyed the artillery crews. At Rommel's headquarters, officers were looking for a solution, as their available means couldn't stop the massive armoured assault. At that moment, the general ordered the 88mm anti-aircraft guns to be used against ground targets with direct fire. The anti-aircraft crews, who usually worked on planes, executed the commander's order. The gunners lowered their barrels to the horizon, trained their sights on the silhouettes of the British machines, and opened fire. The artillery action changed the tide of the battle. Shells weighing nearly 22 pounds, with a muzzle velocity of 2,950 feet per second, punched straight through the tank's armour. Tanks were bursting into flames one after another, and the crews often didn't have time to react to the situation. The surviving vehicles turned around and began to retreat. The offensive at Arras stalled, and the German anti-aircraft gunners remained at their positions amidst the smoke and wrecked British armour, assessing the aftermath of the clash. It is worth noting that this weapon was not originally intended to destroy tanks. The story of the Flak 88 system begins long before the Second World War, back in the skies over the trenches of World War I. Even then, military experts from various countries realized that aviation was becoming a serious threat. Airplanes flew over the lines, dropping bombs and correcting artillery fire. In the early stages, pilots dropped small munitions by hand, but specialized bombers capable of carrying a significant payload appeared quite quickly. Armies needed a way to counter the aerial threat. The first attempts had technical limitations. Ordinary field guns were mounted on improvised stands that allowed the barrel to be aimed at the sky. The effectiveness of such fire remained low, and the chances of hitting a fast airplane were minimal. Germany, fighting on two fronts, was in dire need of effective anti-aircraft defense. In 1916, the first trucks equipped with 88mm anti-aircraft guns appeared on the front lines. The arms companies Krupp and Erhardt, which later became part of the Rhine Metal concern, developed their own versions of anti-aircraft systems. These guns showed decent results in the final stages of the conflict, but the main technological progress was yet to come. Germany's defeat in World War I paused further military development in this area. The Treaty of Versailles significantly limited the military potential of the defeated nation, imposing a ban on tanks, combat aviation, and modern artillery systems. German engineers and military leadership formally agreed to the victors' demands, but in reality they were looking for ways to continue their work. The Krupp concern found an effective solution to bypass the restrictions. In the 1920s, German arms makers established close cooperation with the Swedish company Bofors and eventually acquired a third of its shares. Legally, all development took place in neutral Sweden, which allowed them to avoid any claims. At the end of the 20s, the German Army Command secretly approached industrialists with a task: create a new anti-aircraft gun. The client laid down an important condition. The design had to visually resemble obsolete models so as not to arouse suspicion in France and Britain. Although on paper the project was supposed to look completely harmless, the German side actually aimed to obtain the most modern weapon of its time. The military laid out high technical requirements for the new piece. A 22-pound shell had to leave the barrel at a speed of 2,950 feet per second. The mount was designed to provide a full 360-degree traverse and barrel elevation, ranging from -3 to +85 degrees. The entire system was placed on a cruciform base equipped with 4 folding supports for stabilization during firing. The designers had to achieve a rate of fire of 15 to 20 rounds per minute, and the shells were equipped with 30-second time fuses to engage aerial targets. Experts considered the 75mm caliber insufficient for heavy anti-aircraft artillery, so they settled on the 88mm, the effectiveness of which had been confirmed back in World War I. The clients allowed the caliber to be increased, but they limited the system's total weight to 9 tons. There was a specific requirement regarding mobility. The transport trailer carrying the weapon had to handle being towed by a tractor or truck at speeds up to 25 miles per hour. Krupp engineers understood that development would take years, but the command was rushing them. In 1931, work began under strict secrecy. Blueprints were kept in safes, the team of specialists was restricted, and testing was conducted far away from prying eyes. In the fall of 1932, the designers presented 2 finished prototypes and 10 trailers. The tests showed excellent results. The gun stood out for its accuracy, rapid reloading, and power, qualities highly rated by the experts. The guns were immediately adopted into service under the name 8.8 cm Flak 18, which meant Anti-Aircraft Gun Model 1918. There was a strategic move behind this designation. The 18 index pointed to a design from World War I, even though the weapon was actually completely modern. French and British observers, upon learning of the new system, were supposed to assume that the Germans had merely modernized an old design. When Adolf Hitler came to power in January 1933, the new anti-aircraft gun was already fully ready for mass production. However, initially, the Wehrmacht command viewed this weapon exclusively as a means of air defense for stationary sites. The military positioned batteries around major cities, industrial centers, and bases to protect against air raids, while no one seriously gave a thought to using them against ground targets. As tensions rose in Europe, the design underwent several upgrades. Engineers improved the platform and base to increase stability during firing. The developers also created a 3-piece barrel, which allowed worn sections to be swapped out quickly without replacing the entire barrel. This technical solution was dictated by the gun's high rate of fire, which caused rapid wear on the rifling. On top of that, the crew received an armored shield to protect them from shrapnel and bullets. The modernized version entered service as the Flak 36 just months before World War II began. Later, the Flak 37 modification appeared, featuring improved sights and fire control equipment. But the Luftwaffe Command, which controlled the anti-aircraft artillery, demanded even more power and range. In response, Rheinmetall developed the new design with a longer barrel and a more powerful charge. The gun's shell accelerated to 3,300 feet per second. Its effective ceiling reached 37,000 feet, while the maximum range hit 48,000 feet. Evaluating the new Flak 41, General of Anti-Aircraft Artillery Otto Wilhelm von Renz noted that in terms of performance, this weapon was almost on par with the massive 128 mm anti-aircraft guns. However, the Flak 88 saw its first real combat not in the skies over Germany, but on the plains of Spain. In the summer of 1936, civil war broke out there. A group of generals, led by Francisco Franco, rose up against the Republican government. The German leadership decided to support the nationalists, seeing them as potential allies. Since troops loyal to Franco were stationed in African colonies and the Republican Navy controlled the sea routes, moving the army to the continent was a problem. Franco turned to Germany for help, and Berlin agreed. That summer, 6 Heinkel 51 fighters and 20 Junkers 52 transport planes secretly arrived in Spain. These aircraft became the foundation of the Condor Legion, the German volunteer force in Spain. In addition to aviation, the Germans sent ground units, including the F-88 anti-aircraft battalion. It included heavy and light batteries armed with the newest Flak 88 guns. The crews prepared to fight aircraft, never suspecting that circumstances would change the role of their weapon. On May 11, 1937, near Toledo, an event took place that would influence the future tactics of anti-aircraft artillery. Republican troops launched an attack on nationalist positions using 2 Soviet-made T-26 tanks. The Soviet Union had provided these machines to support the government in the conflict against Franco's forces. German anti-aircraft gunners from the Condor Legion were on the front lines, but when the armor appeared, they didn't have any specialized anti-tank weapons on hand. The battery commander made an unconventional decision. He ordered the Flak 88 anti-aircraft guns to be turned around and fired at the tanks using direct fire. The crews quickly lowered their barrels, usually pointed at the sky, and the gunners locked their sights on these unusual ground targets. The shots proved unexpectedly effective. The powerful shells dealt critical damage to the Soviet tanks. Armor that could withstand infantry weapons and light guns just couldn't hold up against anti-aircraft rounds. Both T-26s were destroyed in a matter of minutes, which amazed the artillerymen themselves. This event became the first documented case of using an 88 mm anti-aircraft gun against enemy armor. After this incident, the Condor Legion Command re-evaluated tactics for using their anti-aircraft assets. Artillerymen increasingly brought in Flak 88 guns to support ground operations. They shelled fortified Republican positions, destroyed artillery batteries, and smashed columns of equipment on the march. By the end of the Spanish Civil War, German officers had gained significant combat experience. Their reports clearly testified the Flak 88 effectively hits ground targets, and its power and firing range pose a serious threat to any armored vehicle. General Ludwig Ritter von Eimensberger became an active supporter of using anti-aircraft guns in an anti-tank role, pushing this idea within the Reich's military circles. The first theoretical opportunity for the Wehrmacht to use the Flak 88 in combat came with the occupation of the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia in the fall of 1938. Anti-aircraft batteries moved alongside the advancing troops, ready to open fire on the enemy. However, the operation went peacefully. The Czechoslovak army offered no resistance, so the guns saw no action. The real test came later. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, starting World War II. German forces crushed the Polish Air Force in the first days, and the country's armoured units were virtually unable to put up any significant resistance. The military barely used the Flak 88 against air or ground targets during this campaign. At that time, the Wehrmacht had about 3,000 Flak 18 guns at its disposal. The lessons of the war in Spain had been taken into account. Hitler personally ordered that anti-aircraft guns be adapted for firing at ground targets. Engineers fitted the Flak 18 with direct-fire sights, which significantly improved accuracy against tanks and fortifications. Despite this, the gun had a major flaw. Its bulky carriage and cross-shaped platform limited its mobility on the battlefield. Deploying from travel to combat mode took a considerable amount of time, which put the crew in danger during mobile warfare. German engineers started looking for a solution and developed two ways to increase mobility. The first project involved mounting the gun on the chassis of a half-track armored vehicle. Such a self-propelled unit could move along with tank columns and open fire quickly without a long setup. Only 10 of these were ever produced, so they never saw widespread use. The second variant was named the Bunkerknacker, which translates to bunker buster. This was a version of the gun that designers mounted on an armored vehicle chassis. Both modifications had a limited barrel elevation angle, from -4 to +15 degrees. This feature made anti-aircraft fire impossible, so these vehicles were intended exclusively for destroying ground targets. On May 10, 1940, German forces launched their offensive into France and the Benelux countries. In this campaign, German units faced resistance from significantly more powerful armor. The French Char B-1 heavy tanks had frontal armor 60 mm thick, which standard German 37 mm anti-tank guns couldn't penetrate. Because of their ineffectiveness against such protection, soldiers nicknamed the guns door knockers. But the German troops already had an answer. Just a week into the Western campaign, the Flak 88 guns demonstrated their combat potential. A battery from the 38th Anti-Aircraft Regiment took up defensive positions near the French town of Montcornet. The gunners fortified their positions, camouflaged the cannons, and trained them on the road, waiting for the enemy to appear. The clash happened soon after. French command sent an armored unit on a counterattack to halt the German advance. The heavy vehicles moved on the battery's positions, their crews relying on the invulnerability of their armor. German gunners let the French get within direct fire range and opened fire. The very first shell slammed into the front of an 18-ton tank. The armor couldn't take the hit. The vehicle ground to a halt in the middle of the road and started smoking. Subsequent shots knocked out 2 more 32-ton tanks. The French crews didn't immediately realize what was happening, since the fire was coming from a distance where they couldn't even visually spot the enemy. The crew of the 4th vehicle, seeing the others destroyed, abandoned their machine on the battlefield. All of this was happening at a range of over 1.5 miles. Not a single French tank gun could deliver effective fire at that distance, while the German anti-aircraft crews were hitting their targets with precision. After the battle at Montcolnet, word spread through the Wehrmacht about the high effectiveness of anti-aircraft guns against armor. Tank and infantry commanders increasingly demanded their units be reinforced with Flak 88 batteries for anti-tank defense. The French campaign ended in a German victory, and the anti-aircraft gun earned a reputation as an effective weapon against tanks. However, the main use of this weapon would take place later, in a different place, thousands of miles from the fields of Europe, in the sands of North Africa. At first, the German command showed no interest in the African continent. The war in Europe demanded all resources, and the distant deserts were considered a secondary theatre of operations. But in the fall of 1940, the Italian leadership decided to expand their colonial holdings and launched an invasion of Egypt from Libya. The Italian army numbered over 200,000 men against 30,000 British troops, so success seemed likely. But events unfolded differently than the Italian command had planned. British units launched a massive counteroffensive, defeating Italian forces and capturing over 100,000 soldiers. The situation for the Italian army in North Africa had become critical, so Mussolini turned to Germany for help. Hitler decided to support his ally to maintain the Axis position in the region. In February 1941, the German Afrika Korps arrived in Libya under the command of General Erwin Rommel, who already had experience fighting the British at the Battle of Arras. Rommel had taken the lessons of previous battles into account and understood the effectiveness of using anti-aircraft weapons against armor. The main striking force of his corps consisted of Panzer III tanks with 50mm guns, along with a small number of heavier Panzer IVs. Since the available towed guns lacked the power to combat British cruiser and infantry tanks, an anti-aircraft regiment equipped with Flak 88 guns was also sent to Africa. In the desert, these weapons proved highly effective. Their air force quickly gained superiority in the skies, allowing the crews to focus exclusively on ground targets without being distracted by aerial threats. Rommel used the anti-aircraft artillery as a mobile reserve, shifting it to difficult sectors of the front. The flat, open terrain favored long-range fire, as the lack of natural obstacles or buildings left tanks vulnerable to German guns. In June 1941, British command launched Operation Battle Axe, with the goal of crushing Rommel's corps and lifting the siege of Tobruk. The British committed significant tank forces to the offensive, counting on their superior numbers, but they ran into a wall of fire from the Flak 88 guns. German anti-aircraft crews fired from camouflaged positions, picking off British vehicles from ranges where they couldn't effectively fire back. During the operation, flak batteries destroyed at least 90 British tanks. Operation Battle Axe was a failure. British forces withdrew to their starting positions, while Rommel cemented his reputation as a successful desert commander. 5 months later, the Flak 88s proved their lethal effectiveness once again. British command made another attempt to turn the tide in North Africa, sending their Mark IV cruiser tanks into battle. These machines were the pride of the Royal Armoured Corps. The crews were well trained and commanders had high hopes for the offensive. But German gun crews were waiting for them on prepared lines. In just 2 days of fighting, Flak 88 batteries knocked out 10 cruiser tanks, opening the way for a German advance on El Adem. The British tankers who survived recalled an invisible enemy striking from great distances, never giving them a chance to get close enough to return fire. After capturing El Adem, German and Italian troops launched an offensive all along the front. Rommel's panzer divisions surged forward, chasing down the retreating forces. But this rapid pace created a dangerous situation as a gap opened up in the front line between the German and Italian units. The Italian infantry was lagging behind the Reich's motorized units, creating a gap that British reserves could exploit. With the tanks pushing ahead, there was no way to close the breach, so command decided to move a battery of anti-aircraft guns into the area. The Flak 88 crews took up positions on open ground, covering miles of desert between the Allied armies. British intelligence spotted the weak point and launched a counterattack. Tanks, trucks loaded with infantry, and artillery tractors rolled toward the battery's position. The British expected to quickly crush this small group of anti-aircraft gunners and strike the rear of Rommel's advancing forces, but they had badly misjudged the situation. The German gunners opened fire from maximum range, and the British tanks started getting knocked out, one after another. Shells tore through the trucks, and artillery crews were killed before they could even set up their guns. The attack stalled, and the surviving British units retreated, leaving behind 5 destroyed tanks, 20 burnt-out trucks, and several shattered artillery batteries. German losses, after a month of fighting in this sector, amounted to just 2 dead and 2 wounded. 4 anti-aircraft guns had held a position that a full infantry company probably couldn't have defended. Word of the German anti-aircraft guns' effectiveness spread across every front of the Second World War. British tankers told stories about guns that could accurately pick off targets from miles away. The name 88, as the Germans themselves called the weapon, became a symbol of deadly threat for enemy tank crews. Allied commanders worked on tactics to counter this weapon, but they never found a universal solution. Air power remained the only reliable means of neutralizing flak positions. However, German crews defended effectively against air attacks, as that was the very task designers had set for the weapon from the start. German industry constantly ramped up production of these guns throughout the war. Krupp and Rheinmetall plants worked multiple shifts, providing a steady supply of new anti-aircraft guns to the Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe. By the end of the Second World War, manufacturers had turned out 19,650 Flak 88s of all variants. These systems provided air defense for cities, protected industrial sites from bombing raids, covered tank divisions on the Eastern Front, and operated against ships in coastal waters. Yet the Flak 88 went down in history primarily as an anti-tank weapon, posing a serious threat to Allied armor across various theaters of war, from the deserts of Africa to the forests of Normandy. An anti-aircraft gun designed to destroy aircraft became one of the most effective anti-tank weapons of the era. The Krupp engineers sketching the first designs in the early 1930s never foresaw such a wide range of uses for their creation. Tank crews from Great Britain, the United States, and the USSR who faced these guns noted their devastating power, which often resulted in heavy casualties among armored crews.